I'm starting this video tutorial by showing you how to make the granny stripes, which are featured between the strips of granny squares. And for this tutorial, I'm actually going to be working on the section of granny stripes which comes after strip 1 and before we attach strip 2. So these are my two sample pieces, strip 1 and strip 2. I'm going to put the second one away just now. And here is the very first strip that you made in the blanket. This is the front of it. The stitch marker is on the front, but I'm going to flip it over so that it's on the wrong side, or the reverse side. And I'm going to start making my granny stripes along this edge. So what you want to do is attach your yarn in a corner with this slip knot, and we're going to be making clusters of treble stitch, which is the very, very basic granny stitch, and chain 2 to start, and that is the equivalent of the first treble. And then I'm just going to, in this corner space, I'm just going to put one treble stitch like that. I'll just put that down to let you see. That's the first part of this granny stripe. Then yarn over, and we've got into the next space along, we're going to put 3 treble stitches. Again, just to remind you, if you want to be using US terms, because this is UK terms, the treble stitch is a double crochet. So we've got 3 spaces along the top of the square before we come to a point where the 2 squares join. So I've done 2 and I've got 1 more to do, and another space, 3 trebles in each of the spaces. Like that. Now we come to this point here where the 2 squares meet each other, and we've got a corner space here and a corner space here. Now what we actually are wanting to do is put a cluster of treble stitches over the top of that join, not one cluster in this space and one cluster in this space, because you would end up with too many clusters and you would have problems with your blanket getting rippled, and also for adding the squares further down the line. So we have to keep the count correct. So we're going to make a cluster, a treble cluster over the top of this join, and to do that what we do is we make the first treble stitch as normal. So that's the first treble stitch, and then we're going to start a second one in the same corner. So we yarn over, insert the hook, yarn over and pull through, and then yarn over and pull through 2, and then we're going to stop at this point when there are still 2 loops on the hook. And now I'm going to yarn over again and go into this second, the corner space that's in the yellow square, and yarn over and pull up your loop. So now you've got 4 loops on the hook, and you're going to yarn over again, pull through 2, and you've got 3 left, yarn over and pull through all 3. And what you've done there is a treble 2 together, so you've decreased 2 stitches into 1, and then we finish off with 1 more treble in that second corner space. And there you can maybe just see it. It looks slightly bigger than the other treble clusters. There's a treble cluster there, and this is the treble cluster that's sitting right over the top of the join. But if it does, I say it does look bigger because these 2 stitches have become 1, But if you look at the top of this cluster, you can see 1, 2, 3 stitches. And then if I push this out of the way, this hook, in fact, I'll take it off. And if you look at the top of the treble cluster sitting over the join, there's 1, 2, 3 stitches. So although it looks slightly bigger, it actually ends up the same size as the other clusters. And you just need to work along your edge with treble 3 in each of the spaces until you come to the next join. And I'll just do that once more, and then I'll see you back at the end of the row. So I've done that one. I've got 1, 2, 3, and another 1, 2, 3, and then I'm at the next corner, or the next join between the corners. So I need to treble 1 in that corner space, the first one, and then I'm going to yarn over, put my hook in that same corner space, yarn over and pull up the loop, yarn over and pull through 2, stop when you've got the 2 loops left in your hook, yarn over, insert your hook in the second corner space, yarn over and pull up the loop. You've got 4 loops on the hook, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 3, and then treble 1 in the second corner space to finish it off. And that way you won't end up with too many treble clusters. Now I'm going to work along to just about the end. I'll come back to show you what happens at the end and how we turn to make the next row. Now I've worked along to the end of my row, and I've just put the last cluster of 3 trebles in before the actual corner itself, and there's the corner. And if you remember way back at the beginning, you started with chain 2, which is the equivalent of a treble, and 1 treble. So we're going to finish with just 2 treble stitches in this last corner space. And that is the end of the first row. Now I'm going to be keeping my same colour. This is Stylecraft Special in Pistachio. So I don't need to change my colour at this point. So what I need to do now is just chain 2, like that, and then flip everything over so that we're back onto the front side of the blanket. There's our stitch marker on the front, and we're ready to start the next row. Now on this row it's just a little bit different because the spaces fall in different parts. So I've chained 2 and turned. That chain 2 is the equivalent of the first treble stitch. I'm going to yarn over, and then this time I'm going straight into the first space, jump over these 2 stitches from round 1, go straight over and work 3 trebles in the first space. And again, we're just working along. This is an easier row to do because we don't have the join between the squares anymore. We've covered that in the first row. So I'm just going to come up to the point where we get to that large, slightly larger looking treble cluster from the row below. So I've got 1 more to do before I get to that. 1, 2, 3. Right, and there is that cluster from the, can you see that clearly? Let me turn that round. That's the cluster that sat over the join, and you just need to jump over that and work into the next space. And so on. And there is what the second row looks like. Got a nice straight edge coming up the side there. So I'm going to work along to the end, and I'll come back to show you what happens when we get to the end of that row. Now I've come back when I've just got the last of the large spaces to fill with treble 3 cluster. So that's 1, 2, 3. And this is not quite the end of this row, because what you want to do now is create a space ready for your next row. So we've got one more treble stitch to put in, just the one. Remember, we started with 1 here and then put in treble 3 cluster. We've done our treble 3 cluster at this end, and we just need to put in one more stitch. And to do that, just split between the 2 stitches from the previous row. Just put your hook in there and make 1 treble. Now at this point, I'm not going to finish that stitch off because I'm going to start a new colour. I've done 2 rows of pistachio, and now I want to bring in a different colour for the next row. And the way you change colour is before you finish the very last stitch. So there are still 2 stitches sitting on my hook, and I've picked up the Duck Egg Blue Stylecraft Special, and to start your new colour, just bend it over your hook and pull it through, and that's you finished off that last treble stitch with your new colour. Now what I prefer to do, because this is quite loose, is just pick up the end of the pistachio green and the Duck Egg Blue and just tie them in a knot. And that holds that first and last stitch quite firmly, like that. And off we go again. We've got chain 2 to make and then turn. And if you remember, this is row 3, and it is the same as row 1. So what we did was we chained 2 and then we put 1 treble stitch into the same space, and we've got a space here. So we put a treble stitch in, and then we can continue along the row. Like that. And then when you get to the end, because we started with 2, we've got 2 treble stitch. We've got our last space to put treble 3, and then at the very end we've got a space to put treble 2. I'll work along, and I'll come back at this point and show you the change of colour once more. Then what I'm going to do is finish off some rounds or some rows of this granny stripe, and I'll be back after that to show you how to attach the next strip. Here I am at the end of row 3 again, and I've done my last cluster of treble 3, and I've just got to put in 2 treble stitches into this last stitch, and this is where I'm going to change colour again. So I'm just leaving that with 2 loops on the hook, and then it's pistachio again, and I'm going to bend that over and pull it through, and then I'm just going to tie it off. Now what is actually happening is we're accumulating quite a lot of ends along the edges of the blanket. Because of the stopping and starting, there are lots of loose ends like this. Now you can see here there's some starting on this side as well. Now as you work up the blanket, there will be quite a lot. Every time we do a section of granny stripe, there's going to be ends on either side. Just forget about them just now. Don't try to worry about sewing these in. Just leave them be, because the border that we put on the long side of the blanket, once we've got all the actual body of the blanket finished, we have borders to do, and the borders on the long side are going to be what's called double borders or envelope borders, which means that they fold over, and it means that we can trap these ends inside the folded over border, and we don't need to sew them in, so don't worry about them at this point. Now I'm going to continue. Row 4 is the same as row 2, so we just start with the chain 2 and turn it again, and then we move straight into the first of the larger spaces and work the treble 3, so that by the time we come to the end, it's treble 3 in this space and then 1 treble in between the last 2 stitches. I'm going to continue now and work this edging, this group of granny stripes, and then I'll come back when we're ready to start attaching the next strip. So I'll see you at that point. I've come along to the end of my last row of granny stripe, and this one was in the cream, and I've finished off, well, I haven't actually finished it off, I've just left my 2 loops on the hook because I'm going to start my next colour, which is the colour that's going to actually attach my strip of the strip 2 of the granny squares. So that is going to get looped onto the last 2 stitches of the cream, and I'm going to tie that off as usual. It's not essential to do that, but I really feel that it keeps the tension quite even. So my duck egg is now attached, and I just need to chain 2 as usual. And our attaching row is going to be done in treble stitches again. Now, if we have a look at this point, you can see that this part of the blanket is on the reverse. Our stitch marker is there on the other side, and this is the wrong side of the join. And as I've said before, all the join as you go is done and attached on the front of the blanket. So what we need to do is we've chained our 2, and we've now turn it over, and that brings us back to the front of the blanket, and we can line up the next 4 squares ready to start. So what we're just going to do is another row of treble clusters, but a kind of join as you go, because we're going to work into the row of granny squares as well. Now I've done my chain 2, and I would normally go in here to do my treble 3, but first of all I'm going up to the corner of the square and make a slip stitch, and then I'm coming down to this space and putting in a treble 3. And then just look for the next space along the square. That's it there, and slip stitch, and back down to the next space on the blanket and treble 3. Next space, slip stitch, and treble 3. And there you can see what happens is that we have created another row of granny stripe in the duck egg, but at the same time it's joining to the squares of the second strip. So you want to work along to the very end. I'll show you what happens at the very end, but as you're working, have a look at where you are, because this, if I move that up, this join of that square becomes the treble cluster, and if you work up those treble clusters one after the other, you see that this fits in with this join, and the same thing will happen coming along this one. That's a good guide to make sure that you excuse me, to make sure that your squares are fitting neatly, because this line of the join as you go should always line up with the other squares in the blanket. And even when you're doing the mini squares, the same thing will happen. Their join will line up, although they're only half the size of these larger squares, so they have a join there too, but they will all line up, and it all looks neat when you see the whole blanket finished. So I'm going to work along, and I'll come back at the very end to show you what happens, and that will be strip 2 joined to the granny stripes. I've actually popped back quicker because it's just occurred to me that there's a little bit difference happens when you come to this join. I've done my treble 3, and it's time to put my slip stitch into the square, into the corner, and so I'm going into that first corner with a slip stitch, and I'm also going to slip stitch into the corner of the second square before I come down to make my next treble cluster, just to hold it nice and firm. And there's the join attached. So up here with another slip stitch, and then 3 treble clusters, and so on. So that's how to make the attached squares to the blanket, and I'll show you when I'm back to the other end how to finish. Now I've come to the end of my row, and if you look carefully you can see I did my last 3 treble stitches, and then I slip stitched into the corner of the granny square, and finally, just to finish off, I came back down and did my final single treble stitch, splitting the 2 stitches of the cream row, and finished off. And that is this row of granny squares firmly attached to the rest of the blanket. And this is what you will repeat as you go up through the blanket, granny stripes followed by rows of granny squares. Bye for now.